Commander Velcora stood tall on the bridge of her ship, the Sovereign Talon. Through the massive viewing window she could see the stars stretching endlessly in all directions. She had commanded this flagship for 15 years, and in that time, she had never lost a battle. The Zenthari Empire was the most powerful force in this part of the galaxy, and Velcora was one of its finest commanders. Her skin was pale blue, almost white, and her eyes were large and dark. The Zenthari had evolved on a cold world where careful planning meant survival. Over thousands of years they had turned that survival instinct into military doctrine. They studied war like scientists studied chemistry. Every battle followed precise calculations. Every victory came from superior planning and better technology. For 300 years the Zenthari Empire had expanded across the stars. They conquered other species with calm efficiency. Some aliens surrendered immediately when Zenthari ships appeared in orbit. Others fought briefly before accepting defeat. None had ever truly challenged the Empire's dominance. War was predictable. War was orderly. War always ended the same way. That morning, Velcora received new orders from the High Council. A species called humans had recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They had established several colonies on planets the Zenthari claimed as theirs. The Council wanted those colonies removed and the humans brought under Imperial control. It would be quick work, they assured her. Humans were primitive. Their technology was decades behind Zenthari standards. Velcora studied the intelligence reports about humanity. They came from a blue and green world they called Earth. It orbited a yellow star in an unremarkable solar system. The planet had given birth to only one intelligent species, which struck Velcora as unusual. Most worlds either had no intelligent life or several competing species. But humans stood alone on their world. The report showed that humans had a violent history. They had fought thousands of wars among themselves. Their entire civilization seemed built on conflict, but it was primitive conflict. They used chemical explosives and metal bullets. They had only recently developed nuclear weapons and had actually used them against each other. Velcora found this disturbing but also telling. Humans were aggressive but not sophisticated. Their space technology was barely functional. They had no plasma shields, no coherent beam weapons, no quantum computers. Their ships were slow and clumsy. A human colony ship took months to travel between stars, while Zenthari vessels made the same journey in days. By every measurable standard, humans were not a threat. This would be another routine conquest. The first target was a human colony on a planet they called New Portland. It orbited a star designated Kepler 442 in human catalogs. The colony was only 5 years old and housed about 50,000 people. Velcora brought 3 warships, which was probably more than necessary. She preferred overwhelming force. It reduced casualties on both sides and ended conflicts quickly. As her fleet approached the planet, human defense satellites detected them. Velcora watched as the colony activated its shields and powered up its weapons. The shields were weak, barely capable of stopping meteorites. The weapons were projectile-based, firing solid metal at subsonic speeds. It was like watching children prepare to fight trained soldiers with wooden sticks. Lieutenant Jake Morrison commanded the Colonial Defense Force that morning. He was 32 years old with brown hair and tired eyes. He had served in Earth's military before volunteering for colonial duty. His wife Sarah worked as a teacher in the colony school. His daughter Emma was 7 years old and loved drawing pictures of the strange purple plants that grew near their home. When the Zenthari ships appeared on his scanners, Jake felt his stomach drop. They were huge. Each one was 10 times larger than anything humans had built. And they just sat there in orbit, not moving, not communicating. The silence was worse than any threat. Jake ordered his forces to battle stations. They had 12 orbital defense platforms and a small garrison of Marines on the surface. The colony had been built for farming and research, not war. Most of the people here were scientists, teachers, and farmers. They had come to this new world to build something better than what they left behind on Earth. The Zenthari attack began without warning. Blue beams of concentrated energy struck the orbital platforms. Metal vaporized instantly. Shields collapsed in seconds. Jake watched in horror as half his defenses disappeared in the first 30 seconds of fighting. The remaining platforms returned fire, but their bullets bounced harmlessly off the Zenthari shields. On the surface, people screamed and ran for shelter. Emergency sirens wailed across the colony. Parents grabbed their children and fled toward the underground bunkers. Sarah Morrison held Emma tight as they ran through streets filled with panicked crowds. Emma cried and asked what was happening. Sarah had no answer. She just kept running. Jake ordered the Marines to defend the main settlement while he tried to coordinate the remaining orbital platforms. It was hopeless. Another Xanthari beam cut through his command center's roof. Half his staff died instantly. Jake was thrown against a wall by the explosion. When he opened his eyes, his ears were ringing and smoke filled the room. From orbit, Velcora watched her forces systematically dismantle the human defenses. It took less than an hour. Her troops landed in transport ships and moved through the colony with practiced efficiency. They rounded up civilians and secured key installations. A few Marines tried to fight back, but they were outmatched. Xanthari armor was too strong, their weapons too powerful. Jake found himself trapped in a collapsed section of the command center. Steel beams pinned him in place, but he could see through a crack in the wall. Xanthari soldiers moved through the streets outside. They were tall and thin, moving with mechanical precision. Behind them, he could see humans being herded toward landing sites. His people, his friends, his family. Through a damaged computer screen still flickering nearby, Jake activated his personal recorder. His hands shook as he spoke into it. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. His voice was rough with smoke and emotion. "This is Lieutenant Jake Morrison of the New Portland Colonial Defense Force. We've been attacked by an alien species calling themselves the Xanthari. They destroyed us in less than an hour. We never stood a chance." He paused, coughing. "They're taking everyone, loading them onto ships. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what they want." Jake watched as more humans were forced into the transport ships. He saw Sarah and Emma in the crowd. They were alive. That was something. Emma clutched her mother's hand, looking back at their home as it burned. Jake felt tears on his face mixing with the blood and dirt. "They think they've won," Jake said into the recorder. His voice grew harder. "They think this is over. They think we'll just accept this." He looked directly at the camera. "But they don't understand us. They don't know what humans are capable of when someone threatens our families. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." The recording cut off as the building settled and more debris fell. Jake slipped into unconsciousness, trapped in the ruins of his command center. Around him, New Portland burned. On the Sovereign Talon, Velcora reviewed the battle reports. 0 casualties among her forces. Minimal resistance. The colony was secure, and all humans had been captured for processing. By tomorrow, they would be assigned to work details on Xanthari industrial worlds. The planet's resources would be cataloged and prepared for extraction. Everything had gone according to plan. Velcora filed her report with the High Council, recommending they move forward with occupying the remaining human colonies. The species posed no meaningful resistance. Within a year, humanity would be fully integrated into the Empire as another subject race. Her intelligence officer approached with additional data. "Commander, we've recovered some human recordings from the battle. Would you like to review them?" Velcora waved her hand dismissively. "No need. Standard battlefield communications, I assume. Fear, confusion, surrender. We've heard it all before from dozens of species." She turned back to her tactical displays, already planning the next assault. The intelligence officer nodded and left. The recording of Jake Morrison's message was filed away in the ship's database, unheard by any Xanthari ears. If Velcora had listened to it, she might have heard something different from the usual sounds of defeat. She might have heard the cold determination in Jake's voice. She might have recognized the anger of a species that had never accepted conquest in its entire history. But she didn't listen. None of the Xanthari commanders did. They were too confident in their superiority. They had the better ships, the better weapons, the better technology. What else mattered? They had defeated species far more advanced than humanity. This would be no different. 3 days later, rescue teams from Earth arrived at New Portland. They found the colony destroyed and empty. Every human was gone, taken by the Xanthari. But they also found Jake Morrison, still alive in the rubble. They pulled him free and evacuated him back to Earth. In a hospital bed, recovering from his injuries, Jake gave his report to military officials. He told them everything he had seen: the power of the Xanthari weapons, the strength of their shields, the efficiency of their tactics. He described how hopeless the fight had been. 6 months had passed since the fall of New Portland. Commander Velcora sat in her command chair, reviewing reports that increasingly troubled her. Something was wrong. Supply convoys that should have arrived at occupation bases were missing. 3 outposts had gone silent in the past month. At first, she thought it was simply the chaos of managing newly conquered territory. But the pattern was too consistent. The Zenthari had occupied 7 human colonies now. Most of the human population had been relocated to work facilities on industrial worlds. The remaining humans on their original planets were under strict surveillance. According to every calculation, resistance should have been minimal. Defeated populations typically accepted their fate within a few months. But these humans seemed different. Captain Nina Torres had once been a cargo pilot, hauling supplies between Earth and the outer colonies. She was 43 years old, with black hair now streaked with gray and dark eyes that had seen too much loss. When the Zenthari invaded, she had been visiting her parents on New Portland. She watched from her cargo ship as the colony burned. Her parents were in those transport ships taken somewhere unknown. She had escaped only because she was already in orbit when the attack began. Nina didn't return to Earth. Instead, she flew to the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets in the Kepler 442 system. There, hidden among millions of rocks and ice chunks, she found others like herself. People who had escaped the invasion. People who had lost everything. People who refused to accept defeat. They called themselves the Free Fleet, though that was a generous name for a collection of damaged cargo haulers, mining ships, and personal shuttles. They had no warships, no military training, and no real hope of victory. But they had anger, and they had determination, and they knew something the Zenthari didn't understand. They knew how to turn civilian equipment into weapons. Nina stood in the cargo bay of her ship, which now served as their command center. Around her were 23 people, most of them former civilians. There was Marcus Webb, who had been a mining engineer. Katie Rodriguez, a shuttle pilot. Dan Foster, who ran a repair shop on one of the colonies. None of them were soldiers, but all of them were willing to fight. The Zenthari calculate everything, Nina explained, pointing to a star chart projected on the wall. They measure risk versus reward. They expect us to do the same. They think we value our lives the way they value theirs. She looked around the room. That's their mistake. We're going to show them that humans will trade 10 of our lives to take one of theirs if it means protecting our families. Their first target was a supply convoy heading to the occupation base on New Portland. 3 Zenthari cargo ships protected by a single escort vessel. The Free Fleet had 8 ships, but they were all lightly armed civilian craft. A direct fight would be suicide, so they wouldn't fight directly. Marcus had rigged a dozen mining charges to look like damaged cargo containers. Katie flew her shuttle ahead of the convoy, broadcasting a distress signal. When the Zenthari escort moved to investigate, Nina's ship dropped the fake containers in the convoy's path. The Zenthari scanners detected nothing unusual. They were just debris from a damaged human ship. The convoy flew right through the debris field. Marcus triggered the charges by remote signal. The explosions weren't powerful enough to destroy the Zenthari ships, but they damaged engines and disrupted shields. Then the rest of the Free Fleet attacked from 3 directions at once, focusing all their fire on the weakened vessels. The battle lasted 7 minutes. 2 of the cargo ships were destroyed. The third escaped with the escort, both vessels heavily damaged. The Free Fleet lost 3 ships, including Katie's shuttle. 17 humans died, but they had done something no one thought possible. They had hurt the Zenthari. Velcora reviewed the battle footage with growing concern. The human tactics made no sense from a military perspective. They had sacrificed nearly half their force for minimal gain. The destroyed cargo ships contained only routine supplies. Yet the humans had acted like it was a critical victory. They celebrated their dead as heroes rather than mourning them as casualties of a foolish attack. But the attacks continued. A week later, another supply depot was hit by a stolen Zenthari shuttle loaded with human explosives. The human pilot crashed directly into the depot's power generator. The explosion destroyed 3 months of supplies and killed 40 Zenthari personnel. It also killed the pilot, a woman named Helen Park, who left behind a recorded message saying she was honored to die for humanity's freedom. Velcora called a meeting with her senior officers. "We're dealing with something unprecedented," she told them. "These humans are conducting suicide attacks. They're using tactics that make no strategic sense. Every simulation shows they should have surrendered by now. Her intelligence officer pulled up data on human history. Commander, their entire civilization seems built around resistance to conquest. Every major human nation has stories of fighting against overwhelming odds. They celebrate something called guerrilla warfare, where weaker forces harass stronger ones indefinitely. They have a saying, "Give me liberty or give me death." Velcora studied the reports with growing unease. She was a military professional. She understood acceptable losses and tactical retreats, but these humans seemed to have a completely different calculation for what was acceptable. They would sacrifice everything for even minor victories. The attacks grew bolder. Nina Torres led a raid on the prisoner camp where her parents were being held. The Free Fleet had grown to 32 ships now, as more humans escaped from occupied worlds and joined the resistance. They had better weapons too, stolen from Zenthari outposts or salvaged from destroyed enemy ships. The camp was on a moon with minimal defenses. The Zenthari didn't expect anyone to attack a facility so deep in occupied territory. Nina's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel right on top of the camp, giving the guards no time to organize a defense. Landing craft descended while other ships engaged the orbital defenses. Dan Foster led the ground team. They moved through the camp, breaking open cell blocks and arming prisoners with weapons taken from dead guards. The Zenthari fought back hard, but they were confused by the human tactics. The humans didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when surrounded. They fought like cornered animals with a ferocity that shocked the methodical Zenthari soldiers. Nina found her parents in Block 7. Her father had lost weight, and her mother's hair had gone completely white. But they were alive. Tears streamed down Nina's face as she hugged them. "We're getting you out," she said. "We're going home." The Free Fleet evacuated 4,000 prisoners before Zenthari reinforcements arrived. Dan Foster stayed behind with 12 volunteers to hold the landing zone. They died buying time for the last transport to escape. Their sacrifice meant 4,000 humans lived to fight another day. Back on Earth, military commanders were learning from every engagement. They studied the Zenthari tactics, looking for patterns and weaknesses. They analyzed captured technology, reverse engineering what they could. But most importantly, they were adapting their entire approach to warfare. Jake Morrison, recovered from his injuries, was promoted to colonel and given command of a new special operations unit. His mission was to train soldiers in the tactics that seemed to work against the Zenthari. Unconventional warfare, hit-and-run attacks, psychological operations, everything that military doctrine said was inefficient. "We can't beat them in a straight fight," Jake told his trainees. "Not yet. They're stronger, faster, better equipped, but we're meaner. We're more desperate, and we're willing to do things they would never consider." He looked at the young men and women in front of him. "They think war is a chess game. We're going to show them it's a knife fight." Velcora requested additional forces from the High Council. She explained that the human resistance was more organized and more dangerous than initial projections suggested. The Council dismissed her concerns. They pointed to casualty ratios. The Zenthari were killing 10 humans for every soldier they lost. By any logical calculation, humanity should be nearing the breaking point. But logic didn't account for human stubbornness. It didn't calculate the effect of seeing your neighbors herded onto transport ships. It didn't measure the anger that came from watching your home burn. The Zenthari understood military science, but they didn't understand human psychology. The Free Fleet struck again, this time targeting a major supply depot on Titan Station. Nina had 60 ships now and better intelligence. They knew the station's weaknesses, its blind spots, its shift changes. They planned the attack down to the second. What they also knew was that the attack would be costly. Titan Station had strong defenses and a large garrison. Military analysts gave the mission a 30% chance of success. Half the attacking force would likely be destroyed even if everything went perfectly. Nina called a meeting of all ship captains before the attack. She laid out the odds honestly. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Some of us won't come back. Maybe most of us." She paused. "Anyone who wants to leave can go now. No shame in it. But those who stay, we're going to hit them so hard they'll remember it for years." 2 years into the war, everything had changed. The conflict that the Zenthari thought would last months had become a grinding struggle that consumed resources and lives on both sides. But something remarkable was happening. Humanity was evolving under pressure, transforming at a speed that terrified their enemies. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, Dr. Lisa Chen worked in a laboratory that technically didn't exist. The facility had been carved into the ice using mining equipment, then hidden with false sensor readings and dummy installations. Here, away from Zenthari eyes, humanity was performing technological miracles. Lisa was 38 years old. With short black hair and glasses she constantly pushed up her nose. Before the war, she had been a theoretical physicist working on exotic matter. Now she led a team of 300 scientists and engineers, all working on a single goal. They needed to match Zenthari technology, and they needed to do it fast. The laboratory looked chaotic. Equipment was scattered everywhere. Cables ran across floors and up walls. Whiteboards covered every surface filled with equations and diagrams. People worked 18-hour days, sleeping in makeshift bunks between shifts. Safety protocols that would have taken months to develop on Earth were ignored completely. We had another accident in Lab 7, Lisa's assistant informed her one morning. His name was Ryan Cooper, and he looked exhausted. The plasma containment failed. 3 dead, 5 injured. Lisa closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of those deaths. That made 73 accidents this month. 15 people dead, but they were making progress. Did we get the data before the failure? She asked. Ryan nodded. The shield held for 8 seconds before collapse. That's 4 seconds longer than last time. Good, Lisa said. She felt guilty for thinking that way. But they couldn't afford to waste any opportunity to learn. Adjust the field geometry and run it again. And Ryan, add their names to the memorial wall. The memorial wall was a growing list of scientists who had died in the pursuit of technological advancement. Every person who worked in the facility understood the risks. They all had friends or family taken by the Zenthari. They all knew that their work might be the difference between human survival and extinction. Within 18 months, Lisa's team achieved what should have been impossible. They reverse-engineered Zenthari plasma shields from wreckage salvaged after battles. They developed a jump drive that could charge in hours instead of weeks. They created weapons that could punch through enemy armor. Technology that had taken the Zenthari a century to perfect, humans replicated in less than 2 years. On Earth, Major Kyle Barnes was transforming human military doctrine. He was 52 years old, a career soldier who had fought in conflicts across 3 continents. He had studied every war in human history, from ancient battles to modern warfare. Now he was applying all those lessons to fighting an alien empire. Kyle stood in front of a room full of officers, pointing to a holographic display of a recent Zenthari victory. "Look at this," he said. "They won because they had superior firepower and better tactics. But notice the pattern. They always do the same thing. Establish perimeter, concentrate fire, advance in formation. It's textbook military strategy." He switched to footage of a human resistance raid. "Now look at this. We lost that engagement, but watch what we did. Feint from the left, retreat, draw them out, ambush from behind. Sun Tzu wrote about this 2,500 years ago. The Zenthari have never seen it before." Kyle's insight was simple but profound. Humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting itself. Every civilization, every empire, every nation had developed tactics to defeat other humans. The Zenthari had military science, but humans had military history. And history was a better teacher than theory. The Battle of Proxima Centauri would prove Kyle's theories correct. Colonel Jake Morrison, promoted again after multiple successful operations, commanded the human fleet. He had 23 ships, newly equipped with Lisa Chen's upgraded weapons and shields. Facing him were 42 Zenthari vessels, including 2 heavy cruisers. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Liberty. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. They were outnumbered 2-1. In any conventional battle, they would be destroyed. But Jake wasn't planning a conventional battle. "All ships execute pattern Napoleon," Jake ordered. It was named after a French general from Earth's past who had mastered the art of sacrificing pieces to win the game. Jake's entire left flank, 8 ships charged directly at the Zenthari center. They took massive damage, shields collapsing under concentrated fire. The Zenthari commander, confident in her numerical advantage, committed her reserves to crush the human attack. Her ships converged on Jake's exposed flank. It was textbook tactics. Identify the enemy's weak point, concentrate fire, destroy them. The humans were making it easy. Then Jake sprung his trap. His left flank, battered but still functional, scattered in all directions. The Zenthari ships, now tightly clustered, suddenly found themselves in the middle of an asteroid field that hadn't been there before. Except it wasn't natural. Jake had spent 3 weeks placing explosives throughout the nearby asteroid belt, creating artificial debris. "Detonate all charges," Jake said calmly. Thousands of asteroids exploded simultaneously. The Zenthari fleet found itself in a storm of rock and ice traveling at thousands of meters per second. Shields designed to stop energy weapons weren't built to handle kinetic impacts on this scale. Ships crumpled like paper. Hulls tore open. Zenthari vessels spun out of control, colliding with each other and with more debris. Jake's remaining ships attacked from 3 directions at once, targeting the confusion in the Zenthari formation. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Jake had lost 9 ships and 4,000 people. The Zenthari lost 27 vessels and retreated with the rest heavily damaged. Commander Velcora watched the battle from her flagship, too far away to intervene. She felt something she hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Not just surprise or concern, fear, real, genuine fear. The humans had used tactics she didn't recognize. They had turned an entire asteroid field into a weapon. They had sacrificed ships as bait, knowing those crews would likely die. They had fought with a combination of ancient strategy and modern technology that should not have been possible. Velcora sent a report to the Zenthari High Council. She marked it urgent and classified. In it, she laid out the truth they needed to hear. The humans are not simply defending themselves. They are learning from every engagement. They study our tactics and develop counters faster than we can adapt. They show no fear of casualties that would cripple any civilized species. They weaponize their environment, their history, and their own willingness to die. She continued, "I recommend immediate cessation of offensive operations pending strategic reassessment. We need to understand what we're facing. This is not a typical subject race-resisting occupation. This is something unprecedented." The High Council's response came within a day. They dismissed her concerns. Casualty ratios still favored the Zenthari. Resources were on their side. Time was on their side. The humans were bleeding themselves dry with their reckless tactics. Press the attack. Show overwhelming force. Break their will to fight. But the Council didn't see what Velcora saw. They looked at spreadsheets and casualty reports. They saw numbers that confirmed their assumptions. They didn't watch the actual battles. They didn't see the humans celebrating victories that should have been defeats. They didn't hear the intercepted communications where human soldiers talked about dying with honor rather than living as slaves. Nina Torres, now commanding a fleet of over 100 ships, listened to the reports from Proxima Centauri and felt pride mixed with sorrow. She had known some of the people who died in that battle. Good people, brave people, but their deaths had meaning. They proved humanity could win. She held a memorial service on her flagship for the fallen. People from all her ships gathered via video link. They observed a minute of silence, then Nina spoke. "We're winning," she said simply. "Not because we're stronger or smarter. We're winning because we refuse to lose. Every battle teaches us something. Every sacrifice brings us closer to freedom." The Zenthari thought they could conquer humanity. They're learning they were wrong. On Europa, Lisa Chen received the battle data from Proxima Centauri. Her shields had held under Zenthari fire. Her weapons had penetrated their armor. Technology she had developed through trial, error, and the sacrifice of dozens of colleagues had worked exactly as designed. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, then got back to work. They were already developing the next generation of improvements. Faster engines, stronger shields, more powerful weapons. The Zenthari had centuries of advancement, but humans had desperation and determination. And desperation was a better motivator than comfort. In training facilities across human space, soldiers studied the Battle of Proxima Centauri. They analyzed every decision, every maneuver, every sacrifice. Kyle Barnes turned it into a training scenario, making sure future commanders understood the principles behind Jake's victory. Use terrain. Use psychology. Use the enemy's assumptions against them. Year 3 of the war brought a change that shocked both sides. Humanity stopped defending. They stopped reacting to Zenthari attacks. Instead, they went on the offensive. Human fleets, now equipped with technology equal to their enemies, struck deep into Zenthari territory. They didn't just fight military targets. They went after the infrastructure that supported the entire empire. Admiral Greg Patterson commanded the new United Earth Fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable. He was 60 years old with gray hair and cold blue eyes that had seen too many battles. Before the war, he had been retired, teaching military history at a university. The Xanthari invasion brought him back to active service. Now he led the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. The Indomitable was a warship built with one purpose: to terrify enemies. It carried weapons that made even human ethicists uncomfortable. Biological agents that could wipe out populations, AI-controlled drones that hunted targets without mercy, antimatter warheads capable of sterilizing entire planets. Every weapon humanity had ever banned for being too terrible was now standard equipment. Greg stood before his assembled fleet commanders, his face appearing on screens across 200 warships. "We didn't start this war," he said, his voice hard and cold. "The Xanthari came to our homes. They killed our families. They took our freedom. They thought we would surrender." He paused. "Now they're going to learn what happens when you push humanity too far." The first target was Kelvar Prime, a massive industrial world that produced 30% of the Xanthari Empire's military equipment. It had a population of 3 billion and defenses that rivaled the Xanthari homeworld. Taking it would require every ship humanity could spare, and would cost thousands of lives. "No mercy," Greg told his fleet. "No prisoners. No quarter given. They wanted to see what humans are capable of when cornered. Now they'll see what we're capable of when we decide someone needs to be stopped." The attack began at dawn, local time. 200 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They ignored the orbital defense platforms initially, instead targeting the planet's power infrastructure. Antimatter missiles struck every major power plant simultaneously. Within minutes, the entire planet's electrical grid collapsed. Then came the real horror. Human ships released biological weapons into the upper atmosphere. Not diseases that killed, but agents that destroyed industrial processes. Microbes that ate plastics and metals. Organisms that broke down the chemicals used in advanced manufacturing. Within hours, every factory on the planet began to fail. The Xanthari defenders fought back desperately. Their ships were equal to human vessels now, and they outnumbered the attackers. Battles raged across the star system for 3 days. Ships exploded. Thousands died on both sides. But the humans kept coming, wave after wave, accepting losses that would have made any rational commander retreat. Jake Morrison led a strike team to the surface. His mission was to destroy the central manufacturing complex, a facility the size of a small city. They fought through heavy resistance, losing half their people in the first hour, but they reached their target. Jake stood in the control center, looking at the screens showing thousands of Xanthari workers fleeing the complex. He thought about his wife and daughter, somewhere in a Xanthari prison camp. He thought about New Portland burning. He thought about all the humans who had died in 3 years of war. "Set the charges," he ordered. "Maximum yield. I want this place gone." The explosion was visible from orbit. The entire manufacturing complex disappeared in a fireball that left a crater 5 kilometers wide. Thousands of Xanthari died instantly. Jake and his team barely escaped, their transport ship damaged and limping back to the fleet. When the battle finally ended, Kelvar Prime was broken. The orbital defenses were destroyed. The factories were either demolished or contaminated with biological agents that would take decades to clean. The power grid was shattered. 3 billion Xanthari found themselves on a world that could no longer support modern civilization. The human fleet withdrew, having lost 38 ships and 12,000 people. But they had achieved their objective. Kelvar Prime would not produce another weapon for the Xanthari Empire for at least a generation. And more importantly, humanity had sent a message. "We can hurt you. We can destroy your worlds. We will make you pay." Commander Velcora received the reports from Kelvar Prime with growing horror. She had fought in wars for most of her adult life. She had seen cities destroyed and populations displaced. But this was different. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had deliberately crippled an entire world's ability to function, and they had done it with the same cold efficiency the Xanthari had once used against others. The same ruthless calculation, the same willingness to accept massive civilian casualties as collateral damage. The humans were becoming exactly what they had claimed to fight against. Velcora made a decision that could cost her everything. She sent a message through covert channels to Colonel Jake Morrison. She knew humans monitored Xanthari communications, and she knew he would see it. The message was simple. You've become what you claim to fight against. Is this the humanity that values freedom in life? Or have we simply awakened something darker within your species? Jake received the message 2 days later. He sat alone in his quarters staring at the words. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as enemy propaganda. But another part, the part that still remembered who he had been before the war, couldn't ignore the question. He recorded a response and sent it back through the same channels. You invaded our homes. You killed our families. You took our freedom. Did you think we'd just roll over? Did you think we'd fight fair? His voice was hard, angry. We gave you the chance to leave us alone. We tried to negotiate. You responded with violence. Now you get to see what happens when you don't. But after sending the message, Jake sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about the Xanthari workers he had killed on Kelvar Prime. They weren't soldiers. They were just people doing their jobs, trying to survive. Like the people on New Portland had been. When did fighting for survival become genocide? When did necessary tactics become war crimes? Nina Torres, now an admiral commanding a battle group, wrestled with similar questions. She had fought for 3 years to free her parents and protect her people. But watching humanity adopt total war doctrine reminded her of the darkest chapters in Earth's history. The atomic bombs dropped on cities, the firebombing of civilian populations, the calculated destruction of entire nations. She met with her senior officers in the conference room of her flagship. They were planning the next operation, another strike deep into Xanthari territory. The target was a colony world with minimal defenses but significant agricultural output. Destroying it would create food shortages across several systems. We're talking about starving millions of people, one of her captains said quietly. Not soldiers, not weapons manufacturers, farmers. Nina looked at the tactical display, seeing the colony marked as a target. She thought about her parents, still in a prison camp somewhere. She thought about all the humans suffering under Xanthari occupation. They chose this, she said finally. Every Xanthari citizen supports their empire. They benefit from conquest. They're not innocent. But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. Were the farmers on that colony world responsible for the invasion of New Portland? Were the children there guilty of humanity's suffering? Where was the line between necessary warfare and simple revenge? Still, she pressed forward. The alternative was surrender, and that was something humanity would never accept. Better to become monsters than slaves. Better to be feared than conquered. It was the logic of survival, cold and brutal and necessary. On Earth, civilian leaders watched the war's direction with growing concern. They had given the military unlimited authority to win the war, but they hadn't anticipated what that would mean. Secretary General Maria Santos called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. Maria was 55 years old, a former diplomat who had spent her career trying to prevent wars, not wage them. She stood before the council, exhausted and troubled. We're winning, she said. But we need to ask ourselves what we're becoming in the process. Are we still fighting to protect human values, or have we abandoned those values to achieve victory? The debate that followed was bitter. Some argued that survival justified any action. Others insisted that becoming like the Xanthari meant the war was already lost. But in the end, the council voted to continue supporting the military campaign. They couldn't risk losing, not when humanity's existence was at stake. Greg Patterson received word of the council's decision with grim satisfaction. He didn't enjoy what the war had become, but he understood necessity. Sometimes you had to fight monsters with monstrous methods. Sometimes the only way to stop evil was to become something equally terrible. He ordered the next wave of attacks. More Xanthari worlds burned. More civilians died. But the Empire's military capability continued to degrade. Every factory destroyed meant fewer weapons for Xanthari soldiers. Every colony disrupted meant fewer resources for their war machine. The Xanthari High Council finally began to understand what they were. The war reached its 4th year, and both sides teetered on the edge of complete destruction. The Xanthari Empire, once the dominant power in the sector, now struggled to maintain control of its own territory. Humanity, having lost billions of people and dozens of colonies, faced exhaustion that threatened to collapse their entire war effort. Something had to change, or both species would destroy each other completely. Commander Velcora, now Supreme Commander after the previous leadership had been killed in a human strike on a military station, faced an impossible decision. The Zenthari High Council had authorized the Genesis Protocol, a weapon system designed as a last resort. It could sterilize an entire planet, burning away all life and leaving only dead rock. The Council wanted to use it on Earth. Velcora stood alone in her quarters looking at the authorization codes. One command from her and humanity's homeworld would die. Every human in the solar system would be killed. Their history, their culture, their entire civilization would end. It would be the ultimate victory. But Velcora had learned something during 4 years of war. She had learned that humans didn't think like other species. Destroying Earth wouldn't end the resistance. It would prove to every human in the galaxy that the Zenthari wanted total extinction, and humanity would respond with weapons even more terrible than what they had already deployed. She had seen the intelligence reports. Humans were developing planet killers of their own, weapons that could ignite stars and destroy entire systems, technology that could spread through space, consuming everything it touched. If the Zenthari killed Earth, humanity would respond by trying to kill every Zenthari world. The war would end with both species extinct. Velcora made a decision that violated every order she had received. Instead of launching the Genesis Protocol, she reached out to the human leadership through encrypted channels. Her message was simple and direct. We both have the power to destroy each other completely. The only question is whether either of us has the wisdom to stop. On Earth, Maria Santos received the message during an emergency cabinet meeting. The Secretary General looked at the faces around the table. Admiral Patterson, Admiral Torres, Colonel Morrison, and a dozen other military and civilian leaders. They were all exhausted, scarred by 4 years of brutal warfare. It could be a trick, Greg Patterson said immediately. They could be trying to buy time while they prepare their planet killer. Nina Torres shook her head. Our intelligence says the Zenthari leadership is divided. Some want to keep fighting. Others know they can't win. This message came from Velcora personally. I've studied her tactics for years. She doesn't lie. Jake Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. We're all tired. We've all lost too much. If there's even a chance to end this without more death, we have to take it. He looked at Maria. But we negotiate from strength. We don't accept anything less than full sovereignty and reparations. Maria nodded. Agreed, I'll send a response. We'll meet, but on neutral ground. And if this is a trap, we'll show them exactly what humanity does to those who betray us. The negotiations took place 3 weeks later on a neutral station in empty space, far from any strategic locations. Both sides brought small delegations and minimal security. Velcora arrived with 2 aides. The human delegation included Maria, Greg, Nina, and Jake. They met in a simple conference room, sitting across a table from each other. For the first time, Velcora saw humans up close, not through tactical displays or intelligence reports. They looked tired and worn, much like her own people, but their eyes held something she recognized now: determination, stubbornness, the refusal to accept defeat. Why should we trust you? Maria asked directly. Your empire invaded our colonies without warning. You killed billions of our people. You turned this into a war of extinction. Velcora met her gaze steadily. You shouldn't trust us. Trust must be earned over time. But you should believe that I understand what will happen if this war continues. Both our species will die. My people will be extinct. Your people will be extinct. There will be no winners, only graves. Greg leaned forward. Then why did you start it? You had superior technology, superior forces. You thought conquering us would be easy. You thought wrong. Yes, Velcora said simply. We were wrong. We underestimated your species in every way. We thought war was about superior technology and tactical superiority. You showed us it's about something more. Something we never understood because we never needed to. Maria spoke again, her voice softer now. We never wanted this war. Every human alive would rather have spent these 4 years building, exploring, creating. But you forced us to remember what we're capable of when pushed. You made us weaponize every advancement, militarize every innovation. You turned our greatest strength, our ability to adapt and overcome, into your nightmare. Jake added, you thought war was a science, calculations and tactics. But humans know war is also an art. It's about will, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. You can't calculate that. You can't quantify the fact that we'd rather die as free beings than live as your subjects. Velcora listened to their words and understood the truth in them. The Zenthari had measured everything they could count. Ships, weapons, resources. But they had never measured the things that couldn't be counted: hope, rage, love for freedom, the willingness to sacrifice everything rather than surrender. The negotiations lasted for 3 days. Both sides argued, demanded, and compromised. The final treaty included heavy reparations from the Zenthari. They would pay for the reconstruction of every destroyed colony. They would release all human prisoners immediately. They would accept strict limits on their military for the next 50 years. In return, humanity would cease offensive operations. They would not seek revenge for the invasion. They would agree to share territory and disputed systems, and both species would commit to peaceful coexistence, guaranteed by mutual technology exchange and cultural programs. When the treaty was signed, Nina felt tears on her face. She thought about her parents who would finally be free. She thought about all the people who had died, human and Zenthari both. She thought about Katie Rodriguez and Dan Foster and Helen Park and thousands of others who had sacrificed everything. Their deaths had meaning now. They had bought humanity's freedom. Jake stood at the observation window looking out at the stars. Sarah and Emma would come home. His family would be together again. But he would never forget what the war had cost. He would never forget the person he had become, the things he had done. War changed everyone who fought it, and some changes could never be undone. Years later, after the prisoners had been returned and the colonies rebuilt, Velcora wrote a classified memoir. It was intended only for senior military officers at Zenthari academies, a warning for future generations. She wanted them to understand what she had learned. The final passage read, "I believed I understood war. I thought it was about strategies, tactics, and the mathematics of conflict. Then I witnessed humanity unleashed. They taught me that war is not simply about who has superior technology or larger fleets. It is about who is willing to sacrifice more, adapt faster, and fight with a ferocity born from defending what they love." She continued, "Humanity fights not as soldiers following doctrine, but as a species protecting its very right to exist. They do not calculate acceptable losses the way we do. They do not retreat when logic demands it. They do not surrender when defeat seems inevitable. That is not a force you can defeat with superior weaponry. That is a force you must never ever awaken." The memoir ended with a simple warning. If you ever consider war with humanity, remember this. They are not the weakest species in the galaxy. They are not primitive or backwards. They are the species that survived ice ages, plagues, and nuclear weapons. They are the species that never learned to accept defeat. Start a war with humanity and you may win battles, but you will never win the war because they will never stop fighting. And in the end, that makes them the most dangerous species any of us will ever encounter. On Earth, a memorial was built for all who had died in the war. It covered several acres and listed billions of names. People came from across human space to remember their lost loved ones. The memorial was simple stone and metal, with names carved in every language humanity spoke. At its center stood a statue of an ordinary person, neither soldier nor leader, just someone standing and looking to the sky. At the base, a simple inscription captured the spirit that had carried humanity through its darkest hour. They believed we would break. They were wrong. We are humanity, and we do not yield. Maria Santos gave a speech at the memorial's dedication. She spoke of the cost of war and the value of peace. She talked about how both humanity and the Zenthari had changed, had become darker versions of themselves. But she also spoke of hope, of the chance to build something better from the ashes. "We won our freedom," she said, "but the price was terrible. We must never forget that. We must remember what war cost us, so we never choose it lightly. But we must also remember what we learned, that humanity, when threatened with extinction, will do whatever it takes to survive, that our greatest strength is not our technology or our weapons, but our refusal to accept defeat." In the years that followed, humanity and the Zenthari became unlikely.